Brilla Public Charter Schools Chief Academic Officer, Michael Carbone, explains to the entire Brilla teaching and administrative staff how the classical education tradition is incorporated at Brilla's K through 8th grade schools in the South Bronx of New York City.
Last year I was tasked to uncover and discover what we actually mean in our mission statement when we say the classical tradition. At a deeper level, I sought to build a clarifying and unifying vision for our approach to curriculum, one we're calling Brilla Classical. Throughout the past year, I've read books, talked to classically trained experts about truth, beauty, and goodness, took some open courses in the classics, and visited schools across the country to deepen my own understanding of the classical tradition. Now, if you know me, I am definitely traditionally anti-script when it comes to presentations. But Mrs. Levine and Mr. Larson have constantly told me, if you get hit by a bus on the way to work, who will know what you were going to say? So it's all here for the record, if anyone wants. I am definitely going to be reading my words today because I want to provide you with clarity and a strong rationale for one of our network-wide strategic priorities this year, deepening our understanding and commitment to the classical tradition and what it means to be thoughtful and innovative in Brilla Classical. I hope that you were able to glean some of the emotion and rationale from your partner about why they chose to be here at Brilla. Some of the common themes that are usually prevalent in response to this question are the belief in access and opportunity for students. Make a silent connection if that was a theme that you heard from one of your partners. I hope that one of these words on the screen behind me is at least one of the reasons that you chose Brilla. Because you are an idealist who believes in the potential of every child, and because of that, you believe that each child, no matter his or her life circumstance, deserves access to an amazing education and the same opportunity as other students across the country. Now you may be asking yourself, Carbone, what the hell does this have to do with classical tradition? Because the classical tradition does not, nor has it ever started with tradition. It was founded in and must always start with this unyielding belief that all of us are unique, special individuals with unalienable inherent dignity. Your very first job as an educator is to teach students how to love. Initially, how to love themselves, and eventually how to love others around them. Seeing lots of silent affirmation around the room. See, all of you were classically hearted, you just didn't know it. So what happens when you combine this immutable belief with the knowledge and skills humans have discovered over millennia? You form individuals who can flourish and live as their best self. When you instill in students a deep sense of self and dignity, you create thinkers. And when you offer those students access to a set of knowledge historically reserved for the white upper class, you create critical thinkers who combine the ideals of humanity with their own inherent worth. This crucial reconciliation empowers them to become idealists, and it is the idealists who change the trajectory of humanity for the better. But humanity is not a sports car. One idealist cannot alter the course of humanity by herself in one lifetime. It is a continuous cascading effort that snowballs, one that requires history as a teacher and virtue as a guide. Those we help to flourish, in turn, support the flourishing of others. This is powerful because it becomes a ripple effect whereby a small handful of truly alive individuals, or a graduating class of Brilla graduates, can go on to positively influence others. This is the penultimate force for good in the world. At Brilla, we want to create idealists, not cynics. This is our first line in the sand. Students must learn to celebrate who they are and fall in love with the tradition of humanity across the ages in order to gain the same access to this worthwhile pursuit of excellence. You see, the term knowledge is power is actually a real thing. We want to equip our students with the knowledge of themselves and of humanity so they can continue to grow the snowball of idealism for their own generation and those that come after. If we simply offer a present view of the world, we create cynics. Cynics complain about and despise the world. But here, we create idealists, people who love the world and want to improve it. Now some of you may ask, why not realists? Aren't they somewhere between cynics and idealists? Our answer is a resounding no. All a realist is someone who accepts their situation or circumstance and simply adjusts their actions to fit in that situation. A realist is not a lofty enough goal. It is an excuse to accept and prepare for the status quo. And I would bet that none of you are here because you want your students to accept and prepare for the status quo. So, if you believe in equity and transforming students into idealists who love the world and want to improve it, you're classically hearted again. Now let's talk about this idea of tradition. When most of us hear the phrase, classical tradition, we probably think of a lot of dead white guys. Okay, that landed something great. Let me attempt to explain away that misconception. Of course, we all know Plato, our first dead white guy. But did you know Plato was the first individual of record to begin what we now call post-secondary education or college? His goal was to educate individuals from all levels of society. He invited people he came across throughout his travels to attend. Some were farmers, others peasants, that guy named Aristotle. They all attended his college. Did you also know that the first university in history accepted women and was tuition free? His college was one of inquiry, where teachers would pose difficult questions and scenarios that were ethically and logically complex, leading to deep discourse and meaning making. Talk about setting the standard for GOK level 4. We're gonna get there. Then we have Aesop. We've all heard of Aesop's fables, the tortoise and the hare, the ant and the grasshopper, Star Wars. Maybe not the last one. Just make sure you're listening. Not too much is actually known of Aesop, but what historians have gleaned was that he was a slave who served as an administrative assistant for his owner, a member of the aristocracy. Many believe his experience as a slave motivated him to write fables with virtues embedded so that he could tell them to his owner's children. And talk about an oral tradition. The compendium of Aesop's fables, we know and reference commonly today, has passed through many cultures over the centuries, and now includes the folklore of Eastern Africa and the parables of ancient Tibet, each one adding to and shaping the moral stories now embedded within. Hypatia, anyone? No one in here has heard of Hypatia. Okay, great, one person. Excellent. Hypatia was actually a pagan and a female philosopher and mathematician in ancient Alexandria, Egypt. She was so sought after as a counselor for her wisdom that she rose to be the advisor for the prefect of Rome in Alexandria, basically the king of Rome's Egyptian empire. Some historians credit her with the idea of moral coaching, emphasizing to the Roman leader that he must introduce the highest moral standards to political life and act for the benefit of his fellow citizens, not himself. Imagine if we had more political counselors who enacted moral coaching with the modern-day politician. St. Augustine of Hippo, patron saint of beer brewers. Born and raised in modern-day Algeria, in his lifetime, he instructed the priests under his direction in North Africa to begin preaching against the act of slavery, naming to rich landowners, wealthy patrons of his own parishes, that slavery was wrong. He was so emboldened and respected as a bishop that he regularly wrote the Emperor of Rome about freeing slaves and disagreed with, at the time, the Catholic Church's blatant and harsh mistreatment of Jewish people. He was also an educational dynamo, and in his parish schools, he ensured that students learned in community with each other and applied what they learned to the community around them. We all know Thomas Jefferson, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. And I picked him because he's controversial for some people in the room. And I like controversy a lot. Tension is good. As I'm sure you are aware, President Jefferson wrote multiple drafts and versions of the Declaration. Here was a man of great ideals, classically educated, but constrained by the context of his time. In one of his drafts, he called for the gradual abolition of slavery after seceding from Great Britain, but the provision was struck out of the final draft by the delegates from southern colonies. He saw the ideal of humanity in history, but knew that his place within it was continuing to add to that snowball of progress, so that that ideal could eventually become reality. Okay, by now you're saying, Carbone, I'm starting to get it, but those are still a bunch of old dead people. Think deeply though. What is the tradition that these few examples help create? That mathematical accuracy and proving your ideas with the beauty of numbers is of value and worth exploring? That disagreeing with authority when it is morally wrong is a just act? That education, knowledge, and action must be grounded in both an individual context and a historical context? That we must continually work toward the ideals of humanity, even in the face of bad ideas? This is a tradition that is worth exposing our students to. And to prove my point, here's Frederick Douglass, the self-taught escaped slave. He credits a textbook called The Columbian Order, which he read in his early teens, as his first realization that slavery and oppression of other peoples was morally wrong. Why would this textbook, that upper elementary students of the era read, help a teenage Frederick Douglass go on to become one of the most respected abolitionists in history? Well, the Columbian Orator was filled with writings and speeches from President Washington, Benjamin Franklin, the philosopher Cato the Younger, and the further, more ancient philosopher Philo Judaeus from ancient Alexandria. Then we have Gandhi. Gandhi was sponsored to attend law school in London, where he derived from ancient Greek philosophy and other historical texts the important actors who had instituted systemic change. Think about it. He was classically educated in Great Britain, then went back to India to expel Great Britain based on the ideals he learned about. Susan B. Anthony, the daughter of a Quaker and a Methodist, received an education in classics not as a student, but as a classics teacher at a boarding school. She initiated the American Equal Rights Association in 1863 that campaigned for the equal rights of both slaves and women. In fact, when Anthony tried to speak at a New York State Teachers Association meeting in 1853, her attempt sparked a half-hour debate among the men about whether it was proper for women to speak in public. When she was finally allowed to continue, she said, "Do you not see that so long as society says a woman is incompetent to be a lawyer, minister, or doctor, but has ample ability to be a teacher, that every man of you who chooses the teaching profession tacitly acknowledge that he has no more brains than a woman?" And you all know this amazing man in his life. Martin Luther King Jr. received his doctorate from Boston University, and his dissertation compared two dialectical thinkers' understanding and approach to truth. In his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, he cited the ideals of freedom written about by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. And in his letter from a Birmingham jail, he reconciles St. Thomas Aquinas' description of justice in relation to unjust laws. Quick prompt. Raise your hand if you've ever read a book by a woman named J.K. Rowling. Look around. Did you know J.K. Rowling received a degree in the classics? A degree she credits giving her the breadth of figurative and descriptive language that so wonderfully communicated the deep ideals of love, family, friendship, and self-worth in the Harry Potter series. Think about the millions of people across the world, as well as those in the room, who were exposed to those ideals as they read those books. All of these individuals, they were students of the classical tradition. You see, the classical tradition is not about oppression. It's about freedom. It's about encouraging people to be truly free, to truly flourish. Freedom doesn't just mean the liberty to do anything one wants. It means the liberty to do what is good, the liberty to become the best you can be. When we grow students who are inherently good and give them access to a world bank of knowledge and history, they will be prepared for excellence. Think about the people who I just introduced you to. Did they not all have an amazing command of language? Were they not idealists? Did they not in some way further the cause of freedom? Are they not all considered great thinkers? Here is our second line in the sand, that you cannot be your best self without a context of the great tradition across humanity. And if you can believe in that statement, then now you're classically minded. But wait, some of you are still teetering on the fence because there's one thing I haven't addressed yet. And that's the idea that culturally responsive pedagogy and the classical tradition can coexist. I'm going to stir the pot again a little bit. Remember, I like tension, conflict, controversy? Here it comes. But you better believe that if the first half of this speech took me an entire year to research and craft, then what I'm about to talk to you about has been my entire career's work of graduate coursework in literature and English. So, I want to start by naming what culturally responsive pedagogy is not. First, it is not multicultural education. At Brilla, we already have thoroughly built structures that celebrate and honor the diverse backgrounds and cultural traditions of our students. Have you not seen our cultural scope and sequence? But multicultural education is not culturally responsive pedagogy. Second, culturally responsive pedagogy does not start by addressing implicit biases. It starts by recognizing the inherent dignity in your students. Third, it's not building students' self-esteem in relationship with peers. At Brilla, we already do that through our character initiatives, love and logics, and the relationships that each of you builds. But that is not a part of culturally responsive pedagogy. And the last misconception, my favorite one, is that there are specific strategies that are in some book somewhere that you can buy. There are not. If you see that book at Barnes & Noble, do not buy it. You will waste money. So, now that I've clarified what culturally responsive pedagogy is not, let me talk about what it is. It's about establishing inclusion, emphasizing the human purpose of what is being taught and its relationship to the student's experience, while still assuming a hopeful view of people and their capacity to change. Culturally responsive pedagogy is about deepening positive attitudes, encouraging students to demonstrate mastery in ways that are meaningful and challenging, and that demand thoughtful progress towards high achievement. It's about enhancing meaning, actively facilitating meaningful discussions and collective inquiry in both historical and contemporary challenges, all in the name of finding solution and compromise. And it's about engendering competence, motivating students to reflect on the process of their own learning and knowledge gained while representing their meaning in multiple ways. So, can culturally responsive pedagogy and the classical tradition coexist? Guess what? At Brilla, it already does. As we continue to build our understanding and deepen our own knowledge of the classical tradition, we can help students come to love themselves, their neighbors, and the potential of humanity. For example, this summer, Miss Carly, where you at, Miss Carly? Give us a wave. There she is. Give a wave at Miss Carly. She created a Socratic seminar framework for Drita, my homegirl, where students will discuss the virtues explicitly and implicitly present in the text, a practice steeped in the classical tradition, as well as an opportunity for students to discuss the impact of becoming friends with people who are different than you, a practice steeped in culturally responsive pedagogy. And at Brilla, we also recognize the importance and power of language, which is why we still also read The Adventures of Robin Hood and have students answer the question, can a person be considered a hero if they don't show humility? There are lessons grounded in the classical tradition that teach eternal truths to our students, that help them discover truth, appreciate beauty, and extol goodness. And so we will continue to ensure that we expose our students to both types of experiences. Today marks the beginning of our collective recommitment to the classical tradition in the Brilla way, and we are starting with some simple, action-oriented next steps to help students extol truth, beauty, and goodness in the world around them. By the end of this year, at least once per marking period, students in all grades will participate in the Socratic dialogue. At least twice this year, they will produce a beautiful piece of writing or art form, and on a weekly basis, they will all encounter virtue in their content. Nod your head if these sound familiar. Great, then you were paying attention yesterday during our strategic priorities session. And when we discuss these objectives at the end of this year, we will all know that our students are better people because we accomplished them. So, now I'm going to ask you to step over those lines in the sand with me once more. First, that we always start with love. Second, that we teach the ideals and best knowledge humankind has to offer. And most importantly, that we empower students to go forth for excellence's sake, with the tools they need to live a life as their best selves. Because we know that Brilla gave them the access and the opportunity to either change the world or be an active part of a better one. Thank you.